Welcome back to Phoenix. Today we're taking a look at the 2024 Pivot Switchblade. While it's very similar visually to the old bike, there's a list of small changes that have added up to some big improvements on trail. In this video, I'll run through what those changes are, give you the strengths and weaknesses of the bike, as well as the bottom line. Let's jump into it. The Switchblade was last updated in 2020 and was a ground-up redesign from its predecessor. For 2024, Pivot builds on the success of that bike with refinements rather than reinventing the wheel. The primary focus of the new bike was downhill performance, primarily at higher speeds. To make those improvements, Pivot has altered the geometry of the bike and kinematics of the DW Link suspension platform to improve descending performance without losing the light, snappy handling they believe a trail bike should have. Travel has stayed the same with 142 millimeters of rear wheel travel and 160 millimeter fork. The DW Link suspension platform now uses a longer, lower link than the previous model to create more rearward axle movement at the beginning of the travel. This rearward movement helps absorb square edge hits and improve rear wheel tracking. The kinematic sees an increase in mid-stroke support from 30.91% up to 32.72% of progression around the same shock tune as the old bike. Changes to the geometry come in the form of a 65.2 degree head tube angle in the low setting, which is just under a degree slacker than the old bike, as well as 5mm longer reach across all sizes and size-specific chainstays ranging between 431, 432, and 436 millimeters. The slacker head tube and longer reach result in a 26mm longer front center and 30mm longer wheelbase overall. Effective seat tube angles get a half degree steeper, and bottom bracket heights have dropped by 2 millimeters across all sizes. When flipped to the high setting, the geometry flip chip allows for the use of a 27.5 rear wheel without much change to the geometry. When used with a 29-inch wheel, the result is half a degree steeper head tube and seat tube angles, a 6mm change in bottom bracket height, and 5mm growth in reach. These changes all seem pretty minimal at first glance, so what difference do they make on the trail? With Pivot's headquarters just around the corner from South Mountain, we took a short pedal over to get a feel for the new bike and test it out on the trails it was developed for our first day of testing. Our second day of testing was spent out at Hawes in Mesa, Arizona for some longer descents that allowed us to get the bike up to some higher speeds. Having spent 2 weeks aboard the outgoing Switchblade, the refinements were quite obvious straight away. Weight distribution feels slightly more centered and results in more even pressure at both wheels. Pedaling the bike, the more upright seated position helps pedal strokes feel more effective with slightly less effort than before, and the increased support from the suspension helped maintain composure through larger undulations while seated. The suspension remained fully active across chatter, and the bike carries a nimble feeling through awkward sections of trail. On the old bike, I struggled with the rear wheel spinning when leaning too far forward up steep climbs, and the front wheel lifting when seated too far back. I experienced far less lift from the front wheel on the new bike and more consistent rear wheel traction, allowing for a greater range of motion while grinding up steep climbs. Pointed downhill, the increased traction is even more apparent, and the bike felt much calmer at high speed, flinching less through successive compressions and when being thrown into turns. Pivot has maintained that highly active, supple off-the-top feeling their bikes are known for, but with better support and traction all around. Rearward axle movement helps soften some of the square edge hits, but also seem to help increase front wheel traction when combined with the longer wheelbase. The chainstays are still on the short side for an XL to maintain a playful feeling, but with 8mm of rearward movement, traction seemed to build the harder I pushed. This made the bike far more comfortable to ride at a higher speed and gives the Switchblade a more sure-footed feeling across more aggressive types of terrain. As far as strengths of the bike, the biggest strength of the Switchblade for me is how well it strikes the balance between planted and playful. The suspension feels more settled than before at speed, but maintains the ability to accelerate across all terrain types with ease. The other most notable improvement over the old bike is the increased traction. It allowed for more aggressive movements in corners and across less settled terrain. It was easy to break free when I wanted to or cut a straight line when tightening up turns. I think this is down to the rear suspension performance and lateral stiffness of the frame in combination with the more aggressive geo. It's the kind of bike where I felt like I could drop my heels and plow, but also dip my heels through undulations to accelerate and get off the ground easily. As far as weaknesses, everyone loves to complain about seat tube angles. I understand I'm a bit of an outlier with a 33.5-inch saddle height, but I felt like maybe going a full degree steeper than the previous generation bike would have helped in my experience and matched the preferences of riders with taller saddles. The C-tube angles create a very efficient position for a wide variety of riding, and I found it to be great for covering flatter terrain quickly. But later in the day, it started to get a bit fatiguing and I began to bobble at a lower cadence. That being said, if you're a high cadence climber or run a more average saddle height, this likely won't be an issue. On the topic of pedaling, my test bike came spec'd with 175mm cranks, which clip the ground quite frequently. Something to consider if you prefer longer cranks. Spec for consumers is said to be 170mm. So what's the bottom line? Well, overall, the bike just feels more comfortable than its predecessor. It's easy to ride across a wide variety of terrain, as any good trail bike should be, and achieves the goal of better descending performance. I think the Switchblade is a great option for anyone wanting to ride park on occasion without feeling undergun, but values efficiency out of their daily driver. If you'd like to know more about the Switchblade, be sure to check out our full first look on vitalmtb.com or hit the link in the description of this video. Thanks for watching.